we are hopeful that funding that we hope to receive from the American Rescue Plan will allow us some flexibility to address those needs. With that being said, Mr. Chair, I'm going to ask Ms. Lori Thomas, Assistant County Administrator over the Budget and Finance divisions of the county, to move forward with the budget presentation.
And Ms. Thomas, before you, let me make a couple comments before you get started, please. But in particular for our new members, our budget work sessions does not require a quorum of council members to proceed. And also, it is not to take action on the budget. It's just simply get information and feedback and request additional information if you need it. Is the primary purpose of this process. Ms. Thomas.
Thank you, Chairman Livingston. Council members, thank you for joining us this afternoon. We sincerely appreciate it. And we'd sort of now like to walk you through administration's recommendations for the general fund and special revenues. I think you all have seen this screen many, many times. This was where we actually began our journey back in January, that what our goal was to actually implement budgeting best practice and to produce a balanced budget that in fact is structurally balanced, meaning that we actually support ourselves with recurring revenues for recurring expenditures and balance it also that we're not exceeding expenditures within a given fiscal year. And again, I'm sure you all remember seeing this one also. Recurring revenues are ones that we can count on. There are property taxes, many of our fees and fines, things of that nature that have some degree of predictability. One thing this year of COVID has taught us, though, that while they may be somewhat predictable, there can be some variations, and we're going to have to deal with those this year. We're also, from the recurring expenditures, we're looking at our personnel line items and some of those operating costs that are fixed no matter what. Reserves, of course, are the portion that are left over, or our fund balance. And we also try to work toward achieving a bottom line that increases or does not impact our fund balance. I'll also remind everyone of what Richland County's policy on fund balance is. Our Richland County's policy is to hold in unassigned fund balance a minimum of 20% and a maximum of 35% of total general fund expenditures for the previous fiscal year. So as our expenditures increase, so do our requirements for minimum fund balance. I'd like to also start by saying thank you to all the departments and thank you to council for allowing me to be here and to be a part of this process. These departments have worked very hard with us this year and very tirelessly, understanding that we were in a position where our goal was to achieve financial sustainability. We've presented historical data to them and asked them to consider what they may be able to do to help us to evaluate their needs and to meet those needs of the county overall that are most pressing. So I'd like to talk to you a little bit about some of the general fund pressures that we were faced with this year. First, there's a state mandate that requires body cameras and the storage of the data from those cameras on our law enforcement officials. This year, the price tag for that is approximately $939,000 more than we've ever had to budget for this. Additionally, we've seen reductions or no increase in funding from state agencies. The courts have shifted the cost for all detainee and inmate monitoring to the detention center now. That carries a price tag of approximately $800,000. We've seen no increased funding for victims assistance, and the number of victims that we're serving and the cost there also increased. We also received no funding for our court-appointed special advocates program, and the costs there continue to increase as, again, services are demanded more in that area. As you all know, we're also facing huge demands and shortfalls in our EMS area. This year proposed in our budget are funding for 12 new positions and $200,000 in additional replacements for general equipment. Our coroner services have seen a 30% increase. I wish I could say that it's related to COVID, but not all of it is. There's a great deal of increased activity in that area from just our general population. Further pressures are imposed by the reduction of fees and fines. We're hoping to see those recover in FY22, but with the pandemic still looming, we're not certain that they will get back to their normal levels. Additionally, with the low interest rates in the markets currently, our interest income has been reduced significantly. This screen shows you our general fund overview. This is also in your recommended budget book. When we began the year this year, our operating requested expenditures were $184 million for fiscal year 22. In fiscal year 21, they were approved at $177 million. We're proud to say that with the efforts of all of our departments, we're recommending a budget that only $179 million in operating expenditures. Excuse me. This represents an increase of only 1% or $1.6 million. On the revenue side, we're projecting a 1.9% increase for the coming year. However, that is substantially less than the amount of requested projects that we did have. So again, once again, we did have to ask for all the help that we could get from our departments. The slide here will show you the actual breakdown of those revenues projected for 22 as opposed to what we were actually approved for in 21, as well as the other sources and financing options to support our budget. We're proud to say this year that we are projecting that as opposed to supporting our budget with $7.8 million last year in fund balance. This year, we're only projecting that we would need to use $5.7 million. I'm now going to turn it over to, here's the general fund revenue detail by line item and where we anticipate these sources of funds will come from. Again, I'd like to point out to you that this is with no projected mill increase for our taxpayers. Are there any questions related to that? If not, at this time, I'll turn it over to James H. to talk about our departmental summary.
Good afternoon, members of council. On the slide that's in front of you is our general fund departmental summary. And just to read it from left to right, the first two columns show what each department was approved for in FY20, FY21. The third column would show what was the department requested. The fourth column, as Lori pointed out, would be what the admin actually recommended. As a summary, in the total amount approved for expenditure, general fund expenditures in FY20 was $174.1 million. This year, FY21 is 177.9. The department's requested an increase up to 184.3, which is about 6.7 million. But admin, through working hard with the departments, were able to pare that down to a recommended budget of 179.4 million. So the budget will go from 100, if council approves it, to go from 177.9 million to 179.4 million in general fund expenditures. As part of the process, the administrator also, in meeting with departments, welcomed any department who may have had concerns that what they requested was not in his recommended budget as a part of that 179.4 million. So at this point in time, we're going to, if council permits, allow those departments who have signed up to speak on their own individual departmental requests.
And Chairman Livingston, this is the administrator, sir. May I be recognized?
Yes, please.
I just wanted to mention to members of council that the previous process that involved departments did not involve this step. But I certainly feel as though as we try to work together collaboratively to really create the type of environment that we need, that as the county administrator, I may make a recommendation and bring that before the body. But I also don't want to mute the voices of our officials or departments who believe that the recommendation that I made does not align with what is in the best interest of the department. And so I did share with them that it would be appropriate in this setting for those individuals who wanted to communicate additional feedback other than the recommended budget to do so. So, Mr. Chair, with that being said, I'll turn it over to you, sir.
Mr. Chair,
Ms. McBride, you recognize.
yes, will there be a limit on the time for talking?
Well, the question I was about to ask is, I'm sure staff have a much better idea of who wishes to speak and how many and so forth, so we can determine something here.
Mr. Chair, my understanding is that we actually only had one department to sign up to speak. We did ask departments prior to the meeting to sign up if they wish to participate. We do have the solicitor's office. So Ms. McBride, Mr. Chair, that is the only department. So if considering that, certainly would consider what you want to provide for a time limit.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that helps a whole lot. I'll ask the solicitor to go ahead and provide what comes you need to provide.
Thank you, Councilman Livingston, Mr. Brown, and others who we've spoken through the process. I'm Byron Gibson, solicitor. I've taken my mask off. We've been vaccinated, so I feel a little bit more comfortable doing that. Seated to my immediate left is Hans Pauling. He's my Deputy Director of Affiliated Services and also an assistant solicitor who's been in this office for over 10 years and is a private lawyer and a public defender before that as well. Thank you. I guess, Chairman Livingston, what you're telling me is since we're the only ones here, we get the other 30 minutes that each department was yielded, so I get an hour to speak to you guys today. Is that what I'm hearing?
No, sir.
I got it.
I answer.
No, I have a mute button.
Well, it's nice to see y'all smile. I mean, I appreciate it, especially in these times. I thank you for your work. It's a yeoman's task. And I think we've all at some point in time said, man, we all live in interesting times. I think that's a blessing and a curse. We can all truly say these have been interesting times. I'll tell you, even as I looked out of my window earlier today, I realized how interesting they really are. So again, we appreciate what you do and just yielding us an opportunity to speak. One of the things I'll say, and this is one I'll say again, Mr. Brown has been absolutely wonderful speaking with us and walking us through the process and guiding us with how he'd like to see our thought process about budgets going and just moving forward. And I respect where he's going and the need to balance budgets. Absolutely, I respect that. I'll say this as a caveat to that is one of the interesting things that this office, the solicitor's office, is tasked with is as we look at number one, coming out of a pandemic, as we all know, it's unprecedented. The fact that we're coming out of this pandemic, crime rates are again on the rise. Our backlog of cases, which we had in my first 2 years, had actually made a substantial step into doing some good things with that backlog. Now that backlog has risen and we're up about 30% now from where we were this time last year, because we've not been able to have any appreciable trials since about March 12th or so of last year. What that means as a practical matter is the analogy I like to use is that, growing up, if, my mother came home, from work and my brother and I were doing some stuff we weren't supposed to do, oftentimes I get the mantra, wait till your dad gets home. And you knew what that meant, because there was going to be some type of regulation that would take place once he got home. And jury trials tend to be the great regulator that we all deal with in the criminal justice system. And so what that means is that anytime jury trials stop happening, that ultimate potential consequence that could be out there is no longer a consequence because people understand they're not going to go to trial. So it essentially, the court system bottlenecks in some kind of way, so you're not able to move cases. So over the last year or so, we've moved a lot of cases. We moved over 8,000 cases last year, but because of the fact that we were not able to have jury trials, a lot of the major cases that we normally would have moved, i.e. murders, rapes, criminal sexual conducts, armed robberies, those types of cases were bottlenecked because many of them didn't move because there was not the threat of a trial. Now the trial started back actually earlier this week. We've seen the numbers of cases that we're able to plead go up because pleas are would help to move the criminal justice system, making reasonable offers and people accepting those offers. So I'm giving you that background because.
Okay, I got the background. I got 2 more minutes.
All right, well, thank you. Where we are on this is with that background being said, we're asked to do a lot more with a lot less at this point in time. And so what we're asking for here is we've tried to do what Mr. Brown asked us to do, but we're still falling short in a couple of areas. The areas are these. You've been gracious enough to grant us an opportunity, to grant us an increase of $86,000, which puts us in a place where we're able to pay 5 of our lawyers $3,000 apiece to raise them to the tier mark system that we put in place about 10 years ago in this office, but we're still about $18,000 short. We're short on that money through our Victims Witness program, Victims Advocates. As you know, that is a mandated program from the state. We have to have a victims advocate attached to every case that comes in this office. Any victim in a case has to have an advocate who can speak on their behalf, and that's required by the state. What's happened is we have several, that budget was cut, and so we're now still $18,000.87 in the hole. And we're asking that you fund that $18,087 so that we can at least completely fund our victims advocates, because those are mandated by law. If you do that, that would raise our salary line to $3,635,972. $3,635,972. So we're asking if you'll raise that. That's one ask that we're making. The second is, it may seem simple, but with copy machines, we're asking that you appropriate an additional $3,000 for our copy machine costs. We have a slew of indictments that have to be made. We have discovery that has to go out. Some is digital, but a lot of it still has to be printed. So we're going to need that additional money in our copy machines, and that's just an additional $3,000 that we're asking for. And lastly, an additional $3,000 for books and publications. Again, with courts back in session, we have to, that's an amount of money that we're going to need in order to ensure that as we're training and doing the things we need to by our younger lawyers and restocking, we still do have hard copies of books that we do need to keep in different publications, some of them digital that we need to have. And so that $3,000 will help. So we're asking for $18,000, like I said, $87,000 for the salaries and wages, $3,000 for copy machines, $3 additional thousand for books and publications. Again, we appreciate what you do and helping us, but we're having every criminal case that comes through Richland County, we touch in some way, shape, or form. And as the crime goes up, in order for us to keep up and do the job that we promised you will do, we do need our budget to increase.
All right. Thank you very much. This is we will certainly take that into consideration as we go through the budget process. And can't tell you how much we appreciate what you do for the citizens of Richland County and do it well. So we certainly commend you for that.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. And thank you, council.
Brown.
Chairman Livingston, if it pleases, we'll move on with the presentation.
If my colleagues don't have any questions about the general fund summary that was just presented, we can move forward. And let me check. We good. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman Livingston. As I've said numerous times, the general fund has different components that it funds in terms of outside agencies. On your screen here listed is one of those components, the contractual and statutory, those 3 groups that we fund annually, Central Midlands COG, City Center Partnership, and the Rate Act, which is a pass-through. In addition, there's also, of course, the discretionary, which is footnoted at the bottom for $200,000 and lump sum appropriations, which we'll talk about in a couple of weeks in the next budget, the next budget workshop. This slide here, in addition to the general fund expenditures that the county administrator recommended for $179.4 million, the general fund supports other funds as well. So it's not just supporting its own self, it supports other funds. So what you have in front of you is the other funds that the county administrator is recommending. Well, let me say this: the other funds that the general fund is supporting, and the amounts that are needed to fund those other funds for FY22. There's the victim assistance program that Solicitor Gibson just mentioned. There's of course the public defender program. There's school resource officer. $500,000, which again, right now that number based off the from the county auditor is $862,500 that goes to economic development. In addition to ongoing taking care of our computer technology needs, the general fund supports it by way of an operating transfer of $350,000. And then, of course, over the last few years, we've had the vehicle replacement program for non-emergency vehicles in the amount of $500,000. And then, of course, there's a small transfer out to the airport fund. So the total would be $8.5 million that the general fund supports other funds in addition to that $179.4 million.
Mr. Chair, Bill Malinowski.
Mr. Malik, you recognize.
Thank you. Mr. Hayes, can you give us an idea what page you're on in this budget book that we've got, or is that something different you're using?
This is just a presentation.
Be nice to follow.
This one.
Yeah, that particular slide is not in the budget book that you're looking, but it is in the PowerPoint presentation that ACA Thomas sent out a short while ago, sir.
So that means it's on a computer slide somewhere, right?
I'm sorry.
Yes,
That
sir.
means it's something that we were sent via an email, correct?
Right, that's correct.
All right. And since I just got in last night from out of town for a week, I haven't seen it. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Hayes,
Yes, sir, ma'am.
are any of the, on the page that we're looking at now, are any of those statutory requirements? Is that victim assistance, that amount?
Well, again, I not being a lawyer, of course, I can only speak towards the victim assistance. Obviously, I think there's some type of component with that. I'm not sure about statutory as it relates to public defender and school resource officers, but economic development, you all adopted a few years ago for the general fund to support it by way of $500,000. And then the computer technology and the vehicle replacement, of course, are not statutory, nor is the airport. So
Yeah.
the only one that I'm somewhat sure about would be victim assistance, but I'm not so much sure about public defender. And I think the school resource officers is by way of a memorandum of understanding between the sheriff department and the county.
Okay, I was talking about the, we mentioned some of the victim assistance that was statutory, and I was wondering about the amounts as we looked on the previous slide you had. So I was just wondering whether that amount was statutory. That's okay.
Right. Again, it's not so much as the amount. I think ACA Thomas can speak to that more. I think she said that the victim assistance program itself is statutory.
Yeah, I realized that. Yeah, I was wondering whether there was an amount. Okay, thank you.
Ms. McBride, this is Lori Thomas. If it pleases you, what I'll do also is to do a little bit more research on those and find out what the funding levels that are required by statute for those programs.
Okay, that's
Which is your question, Ms. McBride, right?
Huh?
And which is what your question is, right?
Yes. Thank you. I'm good.
Ms. Hayes.
We'd also point out that there are 2 transfer outs that are normally done in the course of the year that we are proposing that we do not do this year. One is for the emergency telephone and one is for the Conservation Commission. Both of these funds have significant fund balances and would not be in need of those transfers this year, in our opinion.
Good, thank you.
A few weeks ago, I had brought to the body the fact that there was I'm sorry, Ms. Newton, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you. In terms of the departments that you're not suggesting transfers to because of the fund balance, does that take into account any amounts of the fund balance that might be encumbered or previously committed for projects?
Yes, ma'am, it would.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. A few weeks ago, I had brought to the body some interesting legislation on the possibility of local government, the local government fund and full funding of that. And I just wanted to sort of give you an update on this. The South Carolina House has passed the full funding in their budget that they have sent to the Senate this year. So I would ask that if you so see fit, to please reach out to your senator and ask them to include this legislation. If we were to receive this full funding, this would give the county an additional $1.5 million with which to operate in the next fiscal year. Also, there's another interesting piece of legislation that has gotten some traction and has moved through the House and is currently in Senate Finance. It's related to capital improvement sales tax. We're keenly aware of the concerns that council and our citizens have related to capital projects that require increased millage. However, this bill, which the South Carolina Association of Counties supports fully, would allow the counties to add an additional penny capital improvement sales tax, even if you already have a transportation penny tax or a local option sales tax. It would require a referendum, but it is a significant source of funding that would actually not be a millage related increase. A good idea on this is that our current penny tax for transportation generates in the area between $65 and $70 million a year. So that would be a significant influx of funds that would be able to be earmarked and used specifically for capital projects. And if anyone is interested in further information on this, please let me know, and I will keep you updated on where this piece of legislation goes with the Senate.
Now, members of council, we'll jump into special revenue funds. You may have recalled in the earlier discussion that our special revenue funds are denoted that way because they come from a specific source of funding, and they must be used for, we come from a special source of funding, and they must be used for a specific purpose. So we have several of them. On slide 1, you'll see the Economic Development Fund, as I mentioned. There's two funding sources for that. There's the 7% property tax from the MCIP, Multi-County Industrial Park. And then also back in, I think, 2015, council voted to fund it by $500,000 from the general fund. So that's the $862,500. ACA Thomas mentioned about emergency telephone. Historically, that fund has had two revenue sources, E911 tariffs and then state appropriation. And they've also had a transfer in from fire services and the general fund. You will note that we have recommended that instead of the transfer in being $2.5 million, which would be a combination of the funds from the fire service and the general fund, that only the fire service is supported this year, and that $1.3 million from the general fund not supported. And we just used the additional funds in that fund's fund balance to offset using that $1.3 million from the general fund. The next slide would be a fire services. That's one of our bigger special revenue funds. It's supported by our property tax millage that the county auditor puts on the tax bill. But there's also $2.4 million in water assessment that appear on the bills through the city of Columbia. Because of the total expenditures and transfer out from this fund, they will have to use a small bit of their fund balance in FY22. The bottom part of the slide.
Let me ask you a quick question. What's that 250,000 is what you're referring to as a fund balance they've been using?
Chair, can you repeat that question for me, sir?
How much fund balance are you talking about?
Right. So just slide. This year we budgeted 250,000,
That's just 819,000.
19,988.
Okay. At some point, I'd like in the future to make a note to give me the balance of that fund balance, okay? I don't need it now, but just before we start voting.
Yes, sir. So the next fund would be our HTAX fund. We're projecting revenue for FY22 to be 7.4 million, and then FY23, 7.6 million. Next slide. Our next fund is A-tax revenue. This is a pretty interesting one. We've had some accommodations taxes, unfortunately, even before the pandemic, were dropping, and we noticed that during the pandemic, they dropped further. We're hoping that with the COVID virus being somewhat under control, that things will be able to rebound next year, and we'll start seeing some of those numbers be able to climb back to at least pre-COVID levels. The next one, as ACA Thomas mentioned, the penny sales tax. It's been very robust, especially this year. So we have kind of slightly raised what we project our revenue for FY22 to 73 million. And 74 million in FY23. Neighborhood redevelopment is another fund that's similar to conservation. Both of those funds have a dedicated $500,000, and the county auditor has provided us with his projections for FY22. So that's 891,500.
Mr. Hayes.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, may I speak? I'm sorry.
Yeah,
The neighborhood redevelopment revenue, Mr. Brown maybe have to answer this. That goes directly to what department? It goes, does it go into a general pot? How does that?
Yeah, that right, Judge. Ma'am, that's for the specifically that department, neighborhood redevelopment. And it's my understanding, a lot of those funds were earmarked for, I think, county master plans and things of that nature. But they also have some staff that those funds are earmarked for. But it specifically, it would be a part of community planning and development for their neighborhood redevelopment program.
Okay, is there, Mr. Brown, who's over that? Is there someone over that area?
Yes, ma'am. Community planning and director, his name is Clayton Boyer. Mr.
That's
Boyer.
right. Okay,
Yes, ma'am.
thank you. Thank you.
Okay. So the next one is one of our smaller Title V sheriff revenue. We've noticed that this particular revenue stream has dipped over the last several years. So we lowered our projections for it for FY22 from current 55 to 30,000. The next one is another sheriff associated special revenue. That's of course the SRO program. The sheriff department shared with us their revenue projections for FY22. So the 4.8 million represents what the sheriff's office is projecting the schools to bring in for FY22, and the 1.9 million would be the general fund support of that, which comes from the county's general fund. The next one is a hot topic, victim assistance. I know Solicitor Gibson spoke on it before, and so did ACA Thomas. We've noticed that the revenue really, especially with courts not being in session, a lot of these fees and fines have dropped dramatically over the last few years, even before COVID, and well, even more so during COVID. So we had to lower what we are projecting revenue to be for the victim assistance program in FY22. Our next one is tourism development revenue. This is a type of accommodations tax revenue that the county, it's for local aid tax, and those funds are strictly go to pay the debt service on the convention center. The next one is our temporary alcohol permits. That's associated with the solicitor's office. I think it pays for one of our outside groups and grants, and then there's also some position in his department. Stormwater management, that's the millage on our tax bill. We got those numbers from our county auditor. And Conservation Commission, it's just like neighborhood redevelopment. Both of them are $500,000. That's why those amounts are always the same between those two departments. And speaking of which, that's also another that goes specifically for Conservation Commission projects.
Mr. Hayes.
I have Ms. Newton, then Ms. McBride.
Thank you. Mr. Hayes, quick question regarding the A-tax revenue that you said goes towards the convention center debt.
Okay.
How much longer is that debt financed for? And if you don't know, is that information you can get to me later?
You said how much longer is what? I'm sorry, ma'am.
Yeah, I didn't know how long that debt was being financed for, if we were, in the 9th year of a 10-year debt repayment or the 10th year of a 30-year debt repayment.
We can find out, Ms.
Yeah.
Newton.
Thank you.
All right, so road
Ms.
maintenance,
McBride, I'm sorry.
Yes, with the use of the fund balance, either way, this one has $651,637. Now, is that the balance that that you expected or that they had? That's the actual fund
right.
balance.
Very good question, Ms. No, for FY21 for stormwater, that's what we projected to use as part of their for FY21. No, their fund balance is much larger than that.
Okay.
It's just budgeting for FY21. Their budgeted expenditures exceeded that budgeted revenue, which is 3.5 billion. So to make the budget whole, to balance the budget, we were projected to use 651,000. But that number may or may not be necessary if expenditures come in less than what the department has budgeted to use, and if revenue comes in more. But no, to answer your question, that was just to balance the budget. It does not represent us total fund balance.
Okay, and even if we use those fund balance, we're still within our minimum fund balance between 20 and 30%.
Well, that would be, that's it. That's not the general fund
Oh,
balance.
the special revenue. Okay, I'm with you. I'm with you.
Specifically
Okay,
for stormwater.
I'm
Two
with you.
different fund balance.
I'm with you. Okay. Mhm.
All right,
Thank
so I think we left off with road maintenance. Road maintenance is the next one. This of course is supported by road maintenance fee on the tax bill. In addition to, all right, so we got these numbers from the county auditor. We also, of course, because this is one of the ones in which the departmental requested amount in terms of their expenditures exceeded what we were projecting in revenue. So we had to use some of their very robust fund balance to balance the budget. Next year, that amount would be $2,051,000 if the department utilizes all of their expenditures.
Mr. Chair, if I may be recognized.
Yes, please.
If it pleases council, I'll also make sure that we generate a list of all fund balances to distribute to you all as well.
Just a quick question about road maintenance fee. Is there a reason why you're projecting less this year? Because that's a standard fee on vehicles. Probably won't be any less vehicles. So what was that based on? That's something you got from the auditor, you said? You didn't generate that?
Right. Well, no, this is the average of, it's not so much as that why it's less than for FY22?
Yeah. You got a reduction there from FY21 based on the actual fee.
Right. I think it was so much, I think it was really a situation, Chair, that it could have been over budgeted for FY21. So what we tried to do this year was look more at actual numbers and make sure that the budget reflected what actual revenue were. So that's why the number, we lowered the number from 6.3 million to 6 million in FY22.
Okay, because that's what was approved. Doesn't mean that's what it generated. Okay, I got you. For 21. In other words, you're saying what was approved for 21, not what was generated, right?
Correct.
Yes. So if there are not any more questions, next slide show the actual expenditures. We went through the revenue. This shows the actual, just like the general fund, what each department in the special revenue funds requested and what the admin has recommended. And in some cases, I would point out one thing. If you look at fire services, which is kind of midway down the line, this slide is showing actual expenditures for the department, but there are a couple of special revenue funds that actually also have a transfer out. So you see for fire services, their administrative recommended budget is 28.6 million, but that's expenditures. But they also support, as we mentioned earlier, the E911 to the tune of 1,189,000. So that's why their total budget is 29 million. So, but right here, most special revenue funds just have expenditures, but there are a couple that also may support other funds too, specifically HTAX and fire services.
I have one quick question about the victim assistance under the special revenue on page 132. I noticed the amount for solicitor and court administrator and others are the same from previous year. But what accounts for that significant difference from in the sheriff department victim assistance? I thought we increased that portion last year.
That was an amendment.
Which one?
The sheriff's department was an amendment, and it's requested at 680-89, so there is an request.
For victim assistance, right? Yeah. So, Chair, if you can recall, the during FY21, the current year, the sheriff department came forward with a budget amendment in the amount of 153,456 to account for some of the sheriff department needs and victim assistance.
Yes. So that amount, so the adopted amount does not include that addition.
Yes, the recommended amount does include that additional.
Okay, that explains. That's yeah.
Does include.
I thought it was a new addition, but it just I got you.
Yes, sir.
I thought that was a special edition because it was needed during 2020 or 21. But you made it part of the regular request.
Yes, Ms. McBride, this is the administrator, ma'am. So I don't know if the sheriff's department is on this call right now, but I will tell you that our understanding was that these funds that they came to the council and requested were associated with personnel. And so if they're associated with personnel, those costs would be reoccurring. So it would not be a one-time cost. So if the council is saying to us, or will say that, no, we're not going to fund that again, we certainly will follow your lead. But my understanding was that they presented that to you as a personnel cost, and personnel costs are reoccurring. And these is one of those areas where we're really trying to strongly get in line. So I'll certainly listen to what the council has to say, Ms. McBride, but that's my understanding as the administrator.
Okay, I was just getting clarification. I recall them coming, but I couldn't remember exactly what it was.
And I'm clear on the answer to my question. You know, it's clearly that we just simply giving them the same amount pretty much we gave them last year. It's just that we give them more than the 521 last year.
Yeah.
So I understand the answer to my question now, so I'm fine. Mrs. Tereshio?
Thank you, and I apologize for joining. I can't even be called late. It's probably halfway through. But I'm glad that I caught us on this page of the special revenue funds, because I've had a couple of emails about the change in the Conservation Commission funds, as well as the Soil and Water District funding. So if this isn't a repeat, could we have some explanation about the change in amounts for that, justification for that? Because I believe, especially in terms of the Conservation Commission, that is a special revenue, that's $500,000 that should go directly to them. And I don't understand what there is, why there is a change.
Sure, Mr. Ratio. I'm going to start, Mr. Chair, if I can, and then I'll have Mr. Hayes talk about the financial piece. One of the takeaways from this budget process, and again, Mr. Ratio, good question. I've continued to try to really involve everybody in the budget process. And during this budget process, one of the things that came up as a takeaway is that I really need council to inform me as the county administrator how we are supposed to interface with the Conservation Commission. And what I mean by that is my understanding is that departmental budgets are a function of the council's departments through the county administrator. In the case of the Conservation Commission, if the Conservation Commission is considered a department to themselves that has the ability to, I guess, manage the budget and manage staff, then I really need clarity on that, because the Conservation Commission is trying to do a good job and we're trying to do a good job. And I think there's just a little confusion about who has what authority and how they're supposed to operate. So I think part of that, Mr. Horatio, leads into this question, because there's a disconnect or a misalignment between the structures. So I really need some help from council on making sure we get aligned appropriately. And I think that would really help everybody out. Now, with that being said, we'll talk about the financial piece specifically, and I'll have Mr. Hayes talk specifically about the money side of it.
Yeah, so about midway through on the sheet, the slide that we're looking at now, you'll see that there are two line items for the Conservation Commission. So there's the Conservation Commission for the operating expenditures, and then there's for their $250,000 for their grant program. These numbers were provided to us by the department that manages the conservation, and of course that's CP&D. Those totals came over to a little over $1 million, but the $500,000 based off the county auditor's projection, I think was going to bring in roughly about $891,000. So we would have to use some of the Conservation Commission's more than adequate fund balance. So, but again, the requested amounts did come from the department, and we looked at the revenue, and the revenue was close, a little bit short. So we're gonna have to use a bit of their fund balance to balance the budget.
Okay, and then, thank you. Just as a follow-up, so that that fund balance is reflected where? I'm sorry. I'm looking at this too on a small screen. So,
so no, the fund balance is not listed in your budget book. As ACA Thomas mentioned, we will circulate as part of a document which will show each fund's fund balance, but it's not listed in the budget book, of course. I'm saying, but you will be able to see on a previous slide where we are budgeting for the Conservation Commission's fund balance, what we're budgeting to use from the Conservation Commission's fund balance for FY22.
okay, great. And just as a follow-up, one more to the 250,000 lump sum, that is just one lump sum. That's not split into two different categories as it has been in the past, correct?
Correct, ma'am. And speaking with staff from the Conservation Commission, I guess the recommendation, instead of having two different types of conservation grant programs, they decided to just have one, but the total amount still remains at 250,000.
Okay, great. That works for me.
Mr. Chair,
Ms. McBride?
just to follow up, we've had long discussions, Mr. Brown, regarding where the Conservation Commission belongs. And it's my last understanding, after many, many discussions, that we put it under the department. But again, I just wanted to know that there have been many, many discussions on it, and I thought it was under the department. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Ms. McBride. I would just say that, and maybe we could, there may be a more appropriate time to have this discussion, but I really think it would help all of us out, the new folks and maybe some of the folks with the commission to really establish that, because I think there's, again, just some simple misalignment, just some opportunities to get together. And I just think we're just not together on that whole process, but nothing bad though, just an opportunity.
Okay, Mr. Chair, one last comment.
Yes, please go ahead.
It's regarding Heathwood Academy and the appropriation of funds. I just want to go on record, and I know we're not taking any actions, but these are public funds, and Heathwood is a private school, and there is for the school resource officer, and I think the amount of money was $43,000. And I really don't think legally that we should be funding them, because these are public funds and they're not supposed to go to private schools. So I want to go on record and I know we're not voting, but acknowledging that and saying that I definitely do not support that.
I have Ms. Horatio, your hands up again.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to circle back again to the Conservation Commission, and I'm trying to just wrap my head around it. And I know maybe I need to have a separate conversation with other folks on staff to understand this better. But I have been instructed that according to the ordinance, the commission money cannot be paid with, the district can't be paid with the millage. Can you all help me to understand that a little bit better? The relationship between the millage and other funds and kind of, I won't use the word commingling, but how our funds work together. Could you all hear me?
Ms. Tracy, I'll try to answer that question. We did ask legal regarding the use of the funds from the millage, and if they could specifically be explained. And as the ordinance is written, the funds can be used to support project and activities of the commission.
Okay, so project and activities only, is that, I'm guessing that's sort of similar to use of penny funds?
I would have to compare the ordinances, but I'm happy to do that. I can compare it to some of our other entities as well, to give you some ideas on how that structure works if you would like. But it might, if Ms. McLean is on, she may be able to weigh in on that as well.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
Brian, your hand back up again?
Oh, no, I just didn't take it down, but I would like for legal to look at the spending of the public funds for Heathwood Academy.
Yes, ma'am, I'll mark that.
Thank you. I'll try and take my hand down.
And Ms. Horatio, I do believe that the neighborhood redevelopment funds are also set up the same way, and they are used to fund activities other than just projects. But I will double check that with legal as well.
Okay, thank you so much for your help with that.
Chair Livingston, I had one comment to give to Mr. Ratio to answer a question. Mr. Ratio, on page 129 of the budget book, you will see what we're budgeting for fund balance from the Conservation Commission. So that's on page 129 of the budget book.
Got it. I will mark that.
Good questions. If not, Mr. Hayes, you can continue.
Chairman Livingston, that ends our presentation. We now just open the floor for any other questions related to the entire presentation or anything related to special revenue and general fund.
Let me ask you just a general question before we leave special revenue. Now, economic development is on the special revenue, correct?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Economic development is on the special revenue, correct?
It is.
In terms of the personnel, there appeared to be a significant reduction in the amount that was approved in 2021 versus 2022. And actually, based on the recent strategic plan we saw, the recommendation was to try to improve the staff. So why would we have a significant reduction in the total amount? I'm on page 148 in the book.
140? Okay, go ahead.
Economic development personnel, and you have a pretty significant reduction there.
I'm sorry, Mr. Livingston, could you reference that page again?
The general fund.
Page 148, economic development.
Oh, economic development. Okay, right. I guess.
Salaries.
I can answer.
You have listed in 2021 589,000, and you recommended 437,000. That's a tremendous.
I can answer that. I spoke with Jeff Rubel, the director, And basically what happened was we actually budgeted to what the position control, what they actually paying their staff. So that's the reduction, sir. So
Say that again, I didn't quite understand that.
what was previously budgeted was actually higher than what the position control amounts were. So we made the budget more to actual by budgeting according to what they're actually paying employees, sir.
So you're not reducing the employee amount. I mean, the employees there.
No, sir. No, sir, Mr. Chair. You will find that throughout the budget recommendations that we made, as I talked about in the beginning. The real goal was to look at what is the money that we're actually spending, not just the money that we've been given from year to year. And so that would help us to allocate appropriately available funds for other areas of need. But we did not cut any employees from the Economic Development Department, either directly or through the quote unquote reduction in this line item.
Okay, you see why that would lead my question, what would lead to my question, but when you see that big old difference in the number, and I understand the reason why.
Yes, sir. I understand.
Mr. Chair.
I have Miss Barron, Miss Pugh, and Miss McBride, and someone else. Let me get my, and then Ms. Nisley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I have I guess my question is centered around really looking at centralizing services as being a new council member and having the opportunity to explore throughout the county and what we actually have to offer within house. I've learned that it appears that we have services that would be duplications, and I'll speak specifically to things like copy paper and printing cost. And we have a fleet management, yet there are entities that are within their budgets have to pay fuel and repairs. So I would like to hear a little bit about perhaps centralizing some of these items. We have an amazing print shop that I had the opportunity to visit. They order paper by the pallet. But what I do know after asking around to a couple of departments also purchase paper. And it just appears that, as we look to talk about cost savings and the impacts of COVID, if we can centralize expenses, I would be of the assumption that our budget would reflect in a positive manner. So could you speak to that as to why we have lots of, it seems like a lot of different departments are purchasing the same things. However, the county has a means to be able to be that engine to get those services to the departments.
Ms. Barron, I'll try to answer specifically the two areas that you referenced. With regard to central services, I won't say all departments use them, but I will say that most of the departments within the county use them. And when the departments are paying for the paper, it's actually all coming from central services, just the costs are being allocated. The same with the copy system. It's all centrally purchased, but the copies that are used within the divisions are actually allocated to those divisions, to those departments to be used. It's sort of a way to make the departments responsible for and to consider the way they're using their services, if that makes sense with regards to that. And we will be exploring any possible outliers outside of some of those of the central services area. I had begun to discuss some of those yesterday. With regard to fleet, I could not agree with you more. We are looking, this year you will notice that our risk management budget, which is where our fleet department does house, did see an increase in their salaries. And one was a position that was moved from two other departments that actually will now be housed in risk management. But the other is the creation of is the funding of a position that's existed for some time to actually manage our fleet services. This will include working to develop a full vehicle use policy, making certain that we are following those policies, and better monitoring all of our maintenance, oils, and lubricants, as well as our fuel. We are also still investigating the possibility of looking at a different mechanism for fleet replacement. And if that were to happen, we are in the process of considering making the associated costs with maintenance and operation of the fleet in a central location. However, at some point in time, we'd also have to look at a few of the details related to that to make sure that it's adequately costed for those areas that are not part of the general fund.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. May I have a follow-up question, please?
Yes, please.
So I appreciate your details on the fleet management, but just as a I guess an investigative point that I've experienced in going down into the print shop. If you're not gone, I'd encourage you to go. And that is that and I would like for us to further investigate the purchasing of, for an example, copy paper. It is my understanding that every department purchases their own paper and it does not come through the print shop. And so I don't understand that. And that is something that I've learned firsthand. And so I would like for us to look at that. That to me is wasteful. To not utilize our print shop as a first option is wasteful. Those are resources that we have internally. And so I'm not going to belabor the point, but I just want to encourage staff to look further into this, because I think that we'll be surprised at what we find.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. I'll be happy to.
Mr. Pugh?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I want to start off by saying thank you guys for this great workshop presentation. And I just want to echo the same sentiment says Councilwoman McBride. I do have some concerns about us funding the SORs at Heathwood Hall. And I definitely would like for us to look into that before we move any further and vote on the budget. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Ms. McBride and Ms. Newton.
Oh, Mr. Chair, for the, I don't know whether it's possible with personnel, is it possible to look at how many the numbers? Because I see personnel, but I don't know how many we're talking about. In each category it has personnel and has salaries and wages, but I'm not sure how many we're talking about.
For each department?
Are you understanding?
For each department?
Yeah, each department has personnel. Is it possible to put the number? Because we got personnel, then we have salaries and wages, the total amount, but I have no idea how many people we're talking about in each area.
Yes, ma'am.
Is that possible?
Yes, yes, Ms. McBride. I think it sounds like you wanted to know the number of FTEs that we currently have.
That's exactly.
Yes, ma'am. I'll work with Director Ham's group to get that information.
Thank you. If that's not too much trouble.
Thank you, Ms. Newton, and then Ms. Barron.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Hayes, my question is about revenue, and you may have said this and I missed it. We have a few different slides that outline revenue for our budgets, and some of those note an estimated decrease in revenue. My question is there a slide that you can point to, or can you tell me overall we're anticipating that there's going to be a 5% decrease in revenue in the next budget year, or overall, even taking into account some decreases in some areas, we're going to have a 5% addition to our revenue next budget year. Can you give me the answer to that question, or tell me where to find it?
Yeah, well, excuse me, Ms. Newton. Yeah, I'll certainly do my very best. At the very beginning of the presentation, as part of the general fund overview. And I'm going back to, and in the budget book, I'll give you the page I'm referencing.
Right. I mean, I see some starting on page 5 and 6. They appear,
Right.
and maybe I'm looking incorrectly.
Right.
I can't tell if they're tallied.
So right now, currently, to answer your question, for FY21, we currently have 175.8 million that's budgeted in general fund revenue. But using some of our own projections, plus also numbers we get from the county auditor, we're projecting revenue right now. Again, this number could potentially change, so it's not etched in stone. But right now, we're projecting revenue for FY22 to be 179.2 million, which would be just under a 2% growth. That would account for some decreases in other line items like interest income and also fines, but also those would also account for increases in some of our other ones like taxable sales, like our lost credit revenue and other property tax revenue. So the 179.2 is our best guess estimate currently, which again represents just under a 2% growth in revenue.
And are you, in giving that number, specifically referring to the general fund only?
Right. This is specifically general fund revenue.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Barron, and then Ms. Mackey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I guess I will just go on the record to say I'm quite frugal. So my questions are generated from that. And so I'm looking, another thing that does give me some concern is on page 45 of the general fund, when we look at the amount of money that we spend in insurance. And so I am a little concerned as to perhaps how, or I guess the question is, how do we select our insurance vendor, or is it not more practical to look at like the state plan or something like that? Because I was reading online just coming to this meeting that there is an anticipated increase that will be for insurance. So will we look at other options as we move forward, or just talk to me a little bit, as a rookie here, how do we derive? I think we use Cigna. How did we get here? Is that, I'm sure it's through a procurement process, but.
Yes, ma'am. I'll start, Ms. Barron, and then I'll have Lori pick up. This is an area that we've had discussions, and we already have some, investigation on the way. So you have identified that we do spend a handsome sum of funds in our health coverage plan. We have looked at that and looked to determine whether or not that we could find value in a good benefits plan for a less expensive cost. So that is something that we have already begun to look at. One of the plans that you mentioned is a part of that. And I would just say to you, during this process, we are looking at everything. So I'll just say that in general, but I'll have Lori talk about the additional details, steps that we've taken so far regarding the health plan.
Thank you, Ms. Barron, and for asking the question. Yes, we agree that health insurance is a significant cost to the county. Of course, providing employees with good health insurance is vital, but it also has to be a sustainable product. And we are currently evaluating numerous options. As Mr. Brown said, one is one that you did mention. The cost that you see in the general fund is only part of our health insurance cost. Our total health insurance cost countywide was about $23 million this year, and is estimated to go up by, with the increases that we've seen, $1.7 million in the coming year. So we hope to have further recommendations to follow. We actually have plans to meet with all human resources contacts from each department next week to actually start to talk through these processes. We're working with outside individuals currently to also have them vet some of the investigation that we've done. make sure that when we come to council to make presentation on options, that we can give you the best information possible.
Thank you, because as you all look, and I know I have no doubt that you will do this, but I do want to say I do believe that having good health care for our employees and staff is paramount. I do think it should be something that is economical while at the same time efficient, so that one doesn't dry their bank account out by just having to have insurance to go to the doctors. So thank you for your proactiveness in addressing this issue.
I have Ms. You through, Ms. Barron?
Yes, sir.
Ms. Mackey and then Ms. Neaton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had two questions. I guess one was looking at the Public Information Office and going back to our conversations at the retreat and really looking this year to make, communications and marketing a priority, and wanted to know where in the budget have we looked at including funds for updating the website or looking at improving our communication efforts. I don't see a change in the PIO office budget.
That's a good question, Ms. Mackey. So I'm going to take that in three phases. One, we've actually already this current budget year taken funds, working with the PIO's office, budget, and IT to identify funds to begin to purchase equipment to improve our outdated equipment that we have now. So going forward, we should have better recordings in terms of our council meetings, not dropped and missed opportunities there. Additionally, the IT budget is where those funds will be reflected. So via capital as well as via the budget itself. So those funds would not be in the PIO's budget as we're talking about a technology infrastructure, which you have heard me speak about, and I have put that to action. So that's where you would find that for the budget.
And then I guess the second piece kind of to that is, I know we're talking about infrastructure, but is there anything additional to look at, when we talk about marketing, how we talked about the kind of almost the rebranding and making sure that they have what they need to get out the information. And so we know, they have a set advertising budget that they need to meet specific ads that we have to do, but has there been consideration into just any additional funds that they may need to help them with the communication outside of the website?
Again, a very good question. The reason why I did not recommend an increase in their budget just in the budget document is because if you look at the last several years in terms of the spend from that budgeted amount, there hasn't been much spend. So we feel like the money there would be sufficient to begin. And if there is an additional need, then we could address that. But as I mentioned earlier, I'm not trying to put money in a pot where the money hasn't been used. So we feel like the money is there and it can be used. And so that's why we didn't add any additional funds, Ms. Mackey.
Okay, thank you. And then the second part I had was going back, looking at each department and looking at salaries and staff. I remember a few presentations ago, we talked about the total rewards study that was done as far as making sure that, we are paying staff adequately and addressing raises as needed. Does the recommendations in here, does that address the total rewards program? Are we at the correct level that we should be now, or are we still behind?
So we are based on the studies that the county did a few years back now. Based on those studies, you are still behind. And it is certainly a tough issue to deal with, Ms. Mackey, because what we're talking about trying to do is address the needs while also deal with the fact that we need to balance our budget. And you're talking about reoccurring expenses And based on the previous, the study, I believe the study said that it would take $10 million during their time frame, so I guess 4 or 5 years ago, that the county would need to infuse $10 million of reoccurring expenditures into the budget. And so, no ma'am, the county has not infused $10 million additional dollars of reoccurring expenditures. I think at this point, you've done about, you say how much, Mr. Hayes?
4.8 million.
4.8 million, so that means it would be roughly 5.2 million of reoccurring expenditures that we would need to actually infuse into the budget. And this would be money that we would need every year, not including any other additional expenses that the county is trying to address, because that money would not go down once you added it in. So you bring up a good point, and what we're trying to do is figure out how we can incrementally get the expenditures down so that we can infuse that. But no, ma'am, we have not solved the issue to add 5.2 million additional dollars every year above and beyond what you're already doing now.
And I guess at this point, that study, I mean, is probably outdated at this point. I mean, I understand we're saying that, you know, at that time it was 10 million, but at this point in time, that study is probably outdated, and we're probably not actually competitive with other municipalities and what we're paying employees if we really looked at it in an updated time frame. I assume. I don't know if that's correct. I assume.
That is correct in several areas. Yes, ma'am.
That's all I have.
I have Ms. Newton and then Ms. Teresa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Brown, my question is related in the same category generally as Ms. Mackey's question, which is to ask if all of our strategic priorities that we've discussed are represented in the budget. So I know Ms. Mackey specifically mentioned communications. One of the things that we've also talked about for the past 2 budget years is a strategic planning process. We also have updates to the Summa system and initiatives like that. Are those items represented in our budget?
Yes, ma'am. The funding for the Summa system is represented. Again, those funds, sorry, Mr. Hayes,
Capital funds.
are represented just in a different area. But yes, ma'am, that's, as Mr. Hayes was trying to communicate, that's part of our capital, as you're familiar with that cost. And then also, yes, ma'am, our planning dollars are associated with this balance of this budget as well. So yes, ma'am, we do account for those.
Thank you. That's all from me, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Teresa, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'll just kind of pile on here and say, as we're talking about rebranding, and well, not necessarily rebranding, but giving our website and things a fresh look, I also want to keep the rebrand or reintroduction of what has been Richland Renaissance top of mind, and give that the resources that it deserves, not only in terms of the projects, but also staff and communications efforts. And that's all from me.
Okay, with that said, I'm gonna turn it back over to staff.
Thank you, Mr. Livingston. I'll try to wrap up. I'm going to just cover a general list real quick of things that I've heard that we're going to take back and adjust as necessary to the budget. In terms of staff, hearing from council, I have a question regarding victim assistance. Want to know what is the required funding level for the victim assistance program? There was a question associated with fund balances for all of the different funding sources that we were talking about, which kind of originated from a conservation question. So we will provide a list of all the fund balances that are associated with those items. Also, we want to know how much longer do we have on the convention center debt? So we'll get that question answered. There was a question about the ability to use funds associated with the Conservation Commission and the Water and Soil District. We'll get that information addressed. We're looking at centralizing expenses and looking at the health plan, as well as communicating the number of FTEs or full-time employees by department to be associated with the salary line items. Those are the requests that I've kind of heard, in addition to making sure that we have adequate funding for communications, as well as any other plans that the council have previously addressed. So we will make sure that there is funding associated in the budget that can be identified if it's not clear now. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'll just say to the council, thank you for your participation. This is designed to be a collaborative process. So this feedback will help me go back, make any adjustments, and come back to the next time with additional recommendations based on council's input. So thank you for your input. And Mr. Chair, with that being said, that concludes my remarks, sir.
Mr. Brown, you forgot one.
Did I forget one? What did I forget, Ms. McBride?
Use of public funds for private schools.
Oh, yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
I just have a couple quick questions about some general fund questions that I need the information prior to us voting on these items. For example, just quickly on page 7 under the general fund revenue and fee in lieu of taxes, for example, it's not clear to me why our property tax and other taxes are expected to go up 5%, and fee in lieu of taxes is expected to decrease by 13%. That doesn't make sense to me, particularly we have a few new projects that may be coming online. A lot of recent ones will not, but we have a couple of them that will. So can we check and see why we have a 13% decrease when it comes to fee in lieu of taxes?
Right.
That doesn't make sense to me why one would.
Chair Livingston, may I be recognized?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So property and other taxes are not just actual property tax dollars. There are a couple of other it's property and other taxes. There are a couple of other line items in there, like the county documentary stamps and recording stamps.
So most of it's property though.
So that's why you would account for, and then all of that, you would have sometimes an increase in ad valorem taxes, which would be in property taxes, but not necessarily fee in lieu. What we tried to do was go back and look at what made the budget fit actual. So you could have had a decrease in fee in lieu, but an increase overall in property taxes because ad valorem, because I specifically say taxable sales, our loss credit has gone up over the last several years, but we had to go back and make the numbers more actual as it relates to fee and lieu. But again, we'll put all that in the companion document, sir.
Thank you. And the other one was there's in the budget department on page 32. What's the explanation for the big change in terms of the recommended increase there? What are we doing different?
He said there's a big change in the budget department. What was the
personnel on page 32?
On my department. What was the question?
Budget.
Yeah, we don't.
That's where you funded. Chairman Livingston, we have actually had positions in that department that had not been funded in the past. And we had one position that actually moved from another area. So we've actually trued those up to the actual where they're actually housed now. And we've also started to fund the unfunded position.
And one of the last ones is the OSBO office on page 36. Now, when we funded that office, the primary purpose was because of transportation penny. And that office was spending an awful lot of time referencing transportation penny in terms of every time there's a bidding process thing out, they were very involved in that. They've given us exactly the percentage of minorities and so forth in our programs. Without that department being as engaged with the transportation penny program as much as it is, I like to see what is it that they're doing different to compensate for some of those time and hours and so forth, since the budget is remaining the same, and that was the primary purpose why we even started the department. So I just want to take a look at kind of what we're doing there and why we're still seeing at the same level of funding. And I raised that point, Mr. Brown. I raised that point. Ms. McBride, I think.
Yes, sir.
I think we're getting background from you. Can you not? That's clear now. Mr. Brown, because one question I ask every budget cycle is, I know that there are a lot of areas where we have to have increase from year to year, but I'm always looking for areas whereby you may need less of something too. So let's look and see if there's areas where we need less too because of changes.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions, comments? I think that's most of my highlights. Anything else from my colleagues? Nope. Anything else from staff?
No, sir, Mr. Chair.
If not, shall I entertain a motion for adjournment?
So move.
Second.
Moved and properly second. Ms. Mathis, can you call the roll for the motion to adjourn?
Yes. Malinowski,
Yes.
Pugh,
Yes.
McBride,
Yes.
Livingston,
Yes.
Teratio, Joe Walker, Barron,
Yes.
Overture Walker,
Yes.
Mackey,
Yes.
English,
Yes.
Newton,
Yes.
motion passes.
Thank you very much. And everyone have a lovely evening. To staff, thank you very much also.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right.
Good evening.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.